Sean Haney here with RealAgriculture.com, and I'm joined right now by Alberta Wheat and Barley Commission agronomist Jeremy Boychyn. Hey, Jeremy, how's it going?
Good. How are you doing today, Sean?
Oh, I'm doing pretty good. Hey, have you seen this? Like, only 35% of Alberta is completed harvest. 35% of those acres. That's crazy.
Yeah, it was a tough year, and now we're heading into a tough fall, and all of these crops did not get the heat units we wanted for them to progress, and now we're getting into moist fall conditions, which is pushing stuff back. We had that massive snowfall last weekend, and now we're looking at more issues coming up this coming week. So there's a lot of crop that's out there, and yeah, it's a challenge.
Well, and people in Saskatchewan and Manitoba facing the same sort of adversity, right? It's all three prairie provinces. Now, let's talk about some of the impacts here of this wet weather. There is obviously some very obvious ones, but also some ones that may sneak up on you.
Yeah, so I mean, with this wet snow coming down and pushing some of the crop down, we're obviously going to be seeing some visual quality effects on the crop. Sometimes maybe not significant, sometimes a little bit more significant. So that might bring your grade down one point. But one of the more significant things that we're dealing with right now is falling number. And I've had a few people call in and send me some questions regarding falling number. Hey, my crop was standing. I got it off before that big snow came in, but I'm still seeing low falling numbers. What's going on? And I think it's important to take a step back and kind of realize what falling number is. And falling number is really a factor that relates to the enzyme alpha amylase. And when the crop gets to the end of the season and that seed starts to mature on the head, when it encounters really moist and then cold conditions, it starts to trigger that sprouting trigger where it wants to start to regrow. But before you'll even see any sprouting effects, the alpha amylase is increasing, and it's actually starting to break down that starch. So you may not see any visual effects, but the quality of that seed is starting to go down. And there's two ways that this can happen. First is by having that excessive moisture that it's laying on the ground and you're getting that cold snap. And then there's actually something that's more recently found out called late maturing alpha amylase, which is certain varieties are more sensitive to a cold snap that happens, and this is going to sound weird, but between 25 and 30 days after anthesis. If there's a cold snap that happens in around that timing, certain varieties will actually have an increase of that enzyme and see their falling number drop. So their crop doesn't have to be laying in snow for it to have that effect depending on the variety. The problem is this is new research. We don't know exactly which varieties have that effect. So this is something that we're seeing. So if you look back at your weather and when you actually had that your anthesis, you might be able to line it up with a cold snap that happened.
And there's nothing here that's really preventable, though, is it? This is just sort of a reality of the conditions.
Yeah, so it's purely genetic and environmental. So once that crop gets to that stage, and once that kernel gets to that mature stage, and you get that moisture, you get that cold snap, it wants to germinate, it wants to push through. There's nothing nutrient-wise or spray-wise that you can do to resolve this. But what you can do is one, which kind of relates to Brian Barris's research that's been looked at over the past couple of years, is ultra early seeding. So trying to get that wheat crop in a bit earlier. What he's seen is that seeding between 2 to 6 degrees Celsius with a high seeding rate and a seed treatment is going to get you in a better position to harvest earlier, better quality, better yield. So that's one way to potentially avoid some of that late season moisture. And another way is to try and pick some earlier maturing varieties. We have a desire to try and get the most out of the season. Those longer maturing varieties are typically going to bring in more yield, but it's really a toss-up of, are we really able to get that crop off in its best quality if we're extending the season of our varieties. So it really becomes a challenge and a push back and forth. But we'll be putting out more information as the Alberta Wheat and Barley Commission in our next newsletter that should be coming out today on falling number and what you can do to try and mitigate some of those risks.
Now, similar to the springtime where it was really, really dry in parts of the prairies, people were thinking about, I got to cut back, I got to pull back here, I got to figure out how I can cut my expenses. Some of the same stuff is happening now in the fall because it's so wet. People thinking, oh, I'm not going to get the quality that I wanted. I got to cut back. I got to cut back. There is places to cut back, and there are places not to cut back. Soil sampling, is that a place to cut back?
See, this is one place that I think, no matter what the year is, it should be top of mind when you're heading into the following season. Some of those producers in the southern part of the province who have gone through 3 and now 4 years of drought are wondering where it's reasonable and agronomically intelligent to pull back on some of those inputs to save them some money to get them into next year's. And that have had questions around seeding rates, seed treatments, and herbicides. And these are kind of things that I think are important to maintain in a strong way. So you don't want to be reducing your seeding rates because then you're opening yourself up for A, lower yield, and B, more weed competition once you get in there, and you have a less stable crop, so your chances of getting a even maturity and good quality grow down once you start decreasing that. And that also comes with your seed treatment as well, because those are compounding factors that relate to the quality of your crop. But what we can do is use soil sampling to get a better idea of where the nitrogen is in our soils. So again, a lot in the southern part of the region where they're not pulling up the crops they're expected. This is 3rd or 4th year. There's potentially a lot of residual nitrogen sitting in that soil. So getting an idea of what is there and then actually how much urea or anhydrous you're going to buy and use can really help mitigate some of that risk, and actually you're not putting out too much nitrogen that the crop isn't going to use anyway, because you already have ample amounts in your soil. So this is one place where I feel as much as we want to cut back, it's a important and smart place to invest because it gives you a better position for the follling year.
The soil sample might actually confirm that you should be cutting back. So it's actually confirming your good decision. I actually had to put less urea down in the fall time here. Good points on that. Residual management. Now there's a lot of growers out there. They're trying to complete harvest. I told a story earlier today about how a grower just kind of clipping the heads off the wheat and just trying to get through some of the wet fields that he was dealing with. Obviously, residue management on the ground is also a big consideration this year too. What tips do you have on that?
Yeah, so this is one of those things where I feel like when we get and getting the crop off is the utmost importance right now, and you can feel that talking to any producer. That is number one. Any chance they can get out there, and some of them are going overnight over the weekend. But this is one of those things where it's important to stop and think of how and what am I doing this year is going to affect my next year's crop. And residue management is one of those questions. And taking a step out of the combine and seeing how that residue is being spread across your header width is going to help you get a better idea of whether you're impacting your seeding and emergence quality for next year. So if that chaff or if that residue isn't being spread evenly across that area, especially if you're using disc seeders, but even with other types of seeders, you're going to get clumping. If you're not spreading that residue properly, it can impact how well you can seed, and it's going to impact how well that crop or how evenly that crop is going to emerge from the soil. So taking the time to step out and see how that residue is pushing across your combine header width is going to help you line up better for next year. And keep in mind that chaff is typically the more impactful part of this. So when you look at how maybe running a harrow in the spring is going to help spread that chaff or straw out, typically a harrow is not going to move that chaff very far. It's going to stay in those lines. And even if it does, it's going to have it clump up, and then you're going to have more issues with seeding and emergence next year. So just take the time to step out, make sure that that's spreading across properly, because you're lining yourself up for better seeding quality next year.
You getting a lot of calls to the office about grain drying tips and tricks?
We've had a few, and I mean, it's kind of all over the place in what producers are seeing. But the one thing I'm going to keep reminding everyone is make sure that you're checking your bins once you get it in there. A lot more producers are using grain dryers this year because they're pulling that grain off tougher than it they typically do, which means potentially they're putting it through the dryer twice. But just make sure that you're going back and checking that. Checking that bin to make sure you're not getting any heated or any issues. One thing that I love to see is these guys who are using
like an OP cable.
Yes, the cables that are running through, and keeping a good idea of what's going on in there, because that's going to help you make sure that you're managing that properly. Because if you put that grain in tough, let's say you put it in at 21% and it's at 20 degrees Celsius, you really only have 7 days for that to last in there before it's going to start losing quality. So if you dry that down in 5 days to where you want it to be, and you're like, okay, now I've got an extra 200 or 300 days to work with. Well, not really, because you've lost 5 out of the 7 days of the initial quality, and that's impacting the following quality even if you do dry it down. So you really have to be moving that stuff into prime storage quality as quickly as possible, because even when you dry it down, that's going to impact that storage quality later.
Yeah, I don't care if it's pulses or canola or wheat, barley, whatever it is. You've worked so hard the entire season to get that crop into the bin. Don't lose it in the bin.
Yep, absolutely.
Because like you said, it happens fast. Very, very fast. Hey, Jeremy, thanks a lot, man. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Sean.